Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are on the Grade 11 ELA Unit 6 video series. We are Week 3, Lesson 13. I'm Elisa Ruffin with Leading Educators, and I am guiding you through every single lesson. We are specifically focused on the text everyday use. We started on that last week and have continued into that this week. Today, we are doing another lesson on analyzing the craft and structure of the text. Remember, when we're talking about craft and structure, we are taking off our reader's lens and putting on our writer's lens. So we are examining the choices and techniques that an author makes to make sure that he or she is advancing the plot, presenting characters, and clarifying that theme, creating a certain feeling and thought process in the reader. So really getting to the nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty of writing. And we're going to continue to do that today as we look specifically at the power of word choice and vocabulary. We're going to reflect on those things, and that's going to help us further analyze the craft and structure. Before we get there, though, a few reminders that I always like to give you. Make sure that when we're done today, you don't forget to share your learning with a family member, friend, or caregiver, that you don't forget to do the weekly fluency activity, and that you enjoy an additional 20 minutes of reading from a text of your choice. And maybe yesterday you engaged in that read aloud challenge that I gave you, not just with everyday use, but maybe with the text you were reading. And that helps you really get to the bottom of the tone. So I hope that that was the case and that you enjoyed it. The next part of our routine, as you know, the riddle of the day. So make sure that you're all set and ready to go for that, whether that's gathering some people around you for your daily either competition or friendly discussion, or whether it's you just getting yourself all psyched up, ready to go and focus for the type of thinking we're going to need to do today. I hope you're ready. Now, this riddle is short like yesterday, but still a head scratcher. So I'm hoping that it'll be challenging and at the same time that you will succeed and figure it out. So here we go. What gets wet while drying? What gets wet while drying? I'm going to give you a minute to talk, debate, discuss, but not research on Google. Take a beat and pause if you want to, because here comes the answer. What gets wet while drying? A towel. Right? So if you think about that, right, the purpose of a towel is to dry a surface. So its overall purpose is to dry. While doing so, it absorbs liquid. So what gets wet while drying? A towel. That makes sense. And it's short enough to remember, so you can make sure you try to challenge another person to solve that riddle. So make sure you try it out. It'll be a good one. Not everyone gets it right away. And sharing riddles can be a good conversation starter. The next thing we're going to do is make sure that we have our resources and materials all set and ready to go. You need everyday use today, the text, the learning packet, specifically week 3, lesson 13, note catcher, pen or pencil, and as always, the smartphone device is optional if you want to access the text digitally. A brief overview of lesson 13 for today. The learning target is I can explain the impact of the author's use of dialect in the story. So we'll talk a little bit about exactly what dialect is, and how we're going to do that is reading through some reflection questions, and you'll find those in the think section today. And those are going to specifically focus on the idea and concept of dialect and regionalism, both of which we're going to define. We're going to talk about what they mean, and then you're going to consider how the use of those two strategies, dialect and regionalism, in the text impacted the story overall. You're going to provide some examples from the story to support your response. And then finally, you're going to engage in a pretty creative writing activity that I'm excited for you all to do. And I know that you guys are going to do really well. As always, you are recording your learning in the note catcher. So the reflection questions from the think section is going to be in the corresponding section on the note catcher. Your responses from the conversation that you have with your family member, caregiver, or friend in the talk section. That particular question, what would be lost if the author only used formal language when writing dialogue between characters, right? So you know that there is a certain style of language when the author is writing more descriptively than how the characters actually speak to each other. So you guys are going to talk about what do you think would be lost in the story if the author didn't do that and only use formal language and not the dialect. And then you're going to do the writing activity here that is connected to the conversation you have. So that discussion is actually going to set you up nicely to do the writing for today. And then that creative close that I'll give you more information about later. A brief review of the essential question, as we do all the time, just to make sure you're keeping it in the forefront of your mind and anchoring your understanding of the unit theme and its connection to each text. What do stories reveal about the human condition? And then the specific guiding question for this particular story. What factors lead a person to accept, reject, or feel neutral about his or her heritage? The questions in the think section today, there are two things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about dialect and regionalism. The first think question has you answering what is dialect and regionalism. And then you're going to talk about when is dialect used in the story, everyday use. And then you're going to identify places in the story when the author uses dialect. And how would you describe the language the author uses when she is not using dialect? So all of the questions in the think, talk, and write sections today are connected, and they're fundamentally rooted in your understanding of dialect and regionalism. So I'm giving you two ideas to think through as you are trying to clarify your understanding of dialect and regionalism. So when you think about dialect as a way of using English or another language that is specific to a particular group of people. But we're talking specifically about English because everyday use is written in English. And then we're talking also about regionalism. Regionalism is an expression that is common to a specific place. And these terms are connected because often dialects vary based on region or geography. And another way that helps me remember or fully understand dialect and regionalism that's more personal is if I think about family members or even friends that live in various parts of the country, whether it's East Coast. I have a lot of East Coast family and family from the South. And when I visit there, there's a distinct way of speaking that people in the area have. And even in terms of the expressions that they use that I don't hear back home in Michigan. So a lot of us are familiar with accents, right? And that's just kind of the way your voice sounds when you speak. But there's also a dialect, how you put words together and how words are pronounced, that varies based on just the geography, based on where you are in the country. And so if you have family members from different parts of the country, you may notice that as well. Same thing when those family members come here to visit. I find myself sometimes taking on some of the dialect and falling, in line with that. And they would say the opposite. They would say that when I come there or when they visit here, that Michiganders have a specific dialect that we speak differently. And also when it comes to regionalism, that we have certain expressions that we use in this part of the country that aren't necessarily the same in other parts of the country. So that's another way to think about dialect and regionalism. Think about geography, think about family members or friends, or even if you're watching, television and it takes place or its setting is in a different, region of the world, country, etc., you'll notice that there's probably dialect being spoken and regionalism being used. So that is going to help you bring that understanding to the text to really identify, okay, where in the text is this happening where it's clear the characters are speaking a particular dialect and they're in a certain region of the country. So you're going to find those parts of the text where that happens, and that is going to help you answer the second two questions in the think box. And then I want you to think through in the talk section, what would be lost if the author only used formal language when writing dialogue between characters? And I guess formal language is kind of that standard, if you will, a language that you learn with all the specific grammar rules and so on and so forth. Not necessarily informal language where you're just having free-flowing conversation. So what would happen if the author only used the straightforward standard formal language versus dialect? What would we lose in that story? And once you answer that question, I want you to think through examples from the text that would support your answer. And the key word there when you're writing is lost. What will be lost? And one of the best ways to answer that question for me is to think about what's gained when I do use dialect and regionalism in a story. When an author includes that in a piece, what value does it add? What do I gain? And by identifying what I've gained, I'm able to also concretely identify what's lost, because if it's not there, then I know. And so yesterday our focus was on descriptive language, and that set me up a bit because I've already been thinking about the difference between the characters' word use and the authors. You remember that from one of the questions from the other lesson. And once I put that together with the idea of what's lost, then I'm going to have a really good foundation for responding and writing. So at this point, you can pause the video and take some time to respond to those questions, because it's going to take you a moment to go back through your annotations, to reread and comb through the text and respond. And then when you come back, I will talk to you about the really creative close that I think you're going to enjoy and knock out of the park. So pause the video right here, do your think, talk, write, come back, and we'll do a closing activity. Press pause. All right. So you've done those 3 activities and you're ready to go to close up for today. So today's creative close. So you've done a dramatic read this week, and now you're going to do some writing, but this time not a quick write and not a kind of reflective write. Instead, you're going to select a passage of dialogue from the text. Your choice this time, not mine. So you're going to pick a passage of dialogue that there are multiple characters interacting back and forth, and you're going to turn it into a text message conversation. And then you're going to write that text message conversation in the note catcher under the closing section. So include the original dialogue that you plan on modifying so that you can put it side by side with the text. So you only have to do a few lines here, not a huge long passage, but a good enough dialogue where it would be kind of a text thread back and forth. Because interestingly enough, somebody could argue that text speak, as we call it, the way in which we engage over text message and how we put letters together and drop words and so on and so forth, in and of itself could be considered a dialect associated with a particular generation of people. Now, I'm not saying that that's officially in the books, but a good argument could be made for that. So you're going to try your hand at modifying a portion of dialogue in the text and making it a text thread between characters. So I think you're going to have fun with that, imagining what it would look like between 2 characters having a conversation over text message. See what you can do there and see how creative you can be. Enjoy that conversation when you share it with your family member, friend, or caregiver, and I hope you enjoy the process of doing that as well. You've done, again, the think, talk, write on your turn. Go ahead and finish that closing out. And if you have any additional questions, pause, replay as many times as necessary, and email your teacher for support using the information that we provide here. And a final reminder about sharing, about doing your fluency activity and your 20 minutes of additional reading. Enjoy. And we've come to the end of another awesome lesson in our time together. As always, I enjoy it, and I know that you're going to do great. See you again tomorrow.